Clay Morgan had long since given up on the idea of love. He was a man built from weather and grit, carved out by wind and silence. At 46, Clay had spent more years alone than most men could stomach. He lived on a sprawling, dust-bitten ranch nestled against the Montana mountains, the kind of place where the sky stretched wider than your past, and the wind could strip your bones clean if you let it. There weren't neighbors for miles. The only real companion Clay had left was his cattle dog, Rufus, a half-blind mutt with a limp and a quiet loyalty that didn't ask questions. 15 years ago, Clay's wife walked out on him. No note, no goodbye. Just packed a suitcase one morning and left without looking back. Her name was May, and she'd once brought wildflowers into the kitchen every spring. For a while after she left, Clay tried to keep the house warm and tidy, just in case she came back. But she didn't. Eventually, the flowers stopped blooming, and so did Clay. Now the house was mostly dust and worn furniture. He kept it clean, but lifeless, like a hotel room no one checked into anymore. He had a strict routine. Up before dawn, coffee black and bitter, out to the fields, mending fences, tending cattle, fighting off the creeping loneliness with hard work and long hours. There wasn't time for self-pity, and if there was, Clay shoved it down like sour whiskey women hadn't figured into his life since May. Oh. The bar in town had a few wandering types, flirtatious eyes, easy smiles, but Clay didn't have the words anymore, didn't trust what was left of his heart. He didn't want a one-night warmth. He wanted something real or nothing at all. And after a while, nothing became easier. The townsfolk knew better than to poke at him. They called him the ghost of Morgan Ranch behind his back, though never cruelly. He wasn't mean, just distant. The kind of man who said more with a grunt than most did with a paragraph. Some folks figured he liked it that way. Others thought maybe he was just broken, but not even Clay knew the full truth. Deep down, beneath the years of silence and dust, a part of him still ached. It was quieter now, sure, like a wound scabbed over. But sometimes, on long nights when the fire burned low and the wind howled just right, he'd find himself staring into the flames, remembering the way May used to hum while washing dishes, the way her hand fit into his like they were made to fit. Then he'd shake it off, call himself a fool, and head to bed with only Rufus snoring at the foot. The land was all he had now, wide, stubborn, and loyal in its own hard way. It didn't ask for love, just work. Clay could respect that. Still, lately, something had begun to shift. He was getting older. The winters were harder, the nights longer. There were days when the ranch felt too big for one man. He'd find himself pausing, staring out over the hills, wondering if this was all life had left for him. Maybe he didn't want to die alone out here, buried in the dirt like another forgotten cowboy. But those were dangerous thoughts. Hope had a way of opening doors best left shut. And so, when the day came that a stagecoach pulled up to his ranch gate carrying a woman in a blue dress and a Boston accent, claiming she was his mail-order bride, Clay didn't know whether to laugh, curse, or drop dead on the spot. He hadn't ordered anyone. Hell, he didn't even believe in those kinds of arrangements. But there she was, trunk in hand, hair pinned back tight, staring at him like he was the mistake. What he didn't know, not yet, was that the day she arrived was the day everything began to change. Clay stood on his front porch, arms crossed, boots rooted in the dirt, staring at the woman like she was a hallucination brought on by too much sun. She stared right back. "I think there's been a mistake," he said finally, his voice dry as the dust swirling around them. The woman stepped down from the coach with slow, deliberate dignity. She wore a travel-stained blue dress that had once been fine, a pair of gloves she'd clearly mended more than once, and a hat that looked better suited for a city street than Clay's battered front yard. She had auburn hair pinned up tightly, freckles across her nose, and a set to her jaw that told Clay she wasn't the fainting type. Her name, she told him with a steady voice, was Eleanor Prescott Ellie, for short. 29, born and raised in Boston. A former schoolteacher with no surviving family and apparently no intention of turning around just yet. I was told, she said crisply, that I was to be married upon arrival to a Mr. Clayton Morgan. Is that not you? Clay blinked. Lady, I haven't ordered a damn thing. Least of all a bride. The coach driver, a man clearly anxious to be gone before the coming storm, dropped Ellie's trunk with a grunt, tipped his hat, and rode off before either could stop him. The coach's wheels left deep, fast-fading ruts in the road behind them, for a moment. Clay and Ellie just stood there, strangers caught in the kind of situation neither of them wanted. This is some kind of scam, Clay muttered, turning back toward the house. I assure you it is not, Ellie snapped, following him. I have the letter right here. She dug into her handbag and produced a crumpled but legible correspondence, complete with the name Clayton Morgan and the correct address. The handwriting wasn't hers. She said it was written by the agency representative, a woman named Miss Heller. Boston Matrimonial Services. A proper agency, she insisted. Clay skimmed the letter, frowning deeper with every line. It was his name, his ranch, but not his writing. Someone somewhere had made a mistake, or worse, a joke. Look, he said, handing it back. Whatever this is, you got the wrong man. I didn't sign up for this. I don't want a wife. Ellie's eyes flashed. And I didn't come all this way just to be dumped off in the wilderness like unwanted freight. I paid for this passage myself. I left behind everything. I have nowhere else to go. Clay shrugged. Ain't my fault. She gave a short, incredulous laugh. So what do you propose then? Leave me out here in the cold until I freeze? Or send me walking back to town, 15 miles away? Clay rubbed his jaw, feeling cornered by a situation he never asked for. Rufus, sensing the tension, stood between them with his ears perked and eyes wary. To make matters worse, the wind had picked up. Snowflakes were already floating down in lazy spirals, the early warning of a late autumn blizzard that would sweep in by nightfall. Fine, he said at last gruffly. One night. Just one. Until the storm passes. After that, you're on the next coach out of here. Ellie exhaled slowly, not victory exactly, but survival. She nodded. One night. Inside, Clay cleared the small guest room, a space he hadn't used in years, and lit the old stove to take the chill out of the air. Ellie settled in without fuss, but not without comment. The place, she noted, could use a woman's touch. He ignored that. Over a supper of stew and cornbread, they sat across from each other in awkward silence. Ellie kept her manners crisp. Clay kept his distance. Neither said much. But both knew this wasn't the end of the conversation, only the beginning. That night, as the wind howled outside and snow blanketed the world beyond the windows, Clay lay in bed staring at the ceiling. A woman, a real, breathing woman, was sleeping under his roof for the first time in 15 years. It felt strange, unsettling, like the past was trying to crawl out of its grave, and he didn't know it yet. But something had already shifted inside him, something small like the first crack in thick ice. By morning, the ranch was buried in white. Snow had come down hard through the night, silent and unrelenting. It blanketed the hills, swallowed the road, and froze the world in place like the land had been put under glass. Clay stood on the porch, steaming mug in hand, staring out over the storm's aftermath. His breath misted in the air. Even Rufus looked reluctant to leave the warmth of the hearth. Eleanor Prescott was not going anywhere. She joined him outside. Wrapped tight in a borrowed coat that hung too large on her frame, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "I suppose this is what passes for autumn out here," she said, glancing at the snowdrifts. "It's October," Clay grunted. "This is mild." Ellie arched an eyebrow but said nothing. She'd already asked about getting back to town. Clay had been blunt. No stagecoaches would be running for days, maybe longer. The road was impassable, and the nearest neighbor was a full day's ride. Not that anyone would be visiting in weather like this, for better or worse. She was stuck inside the ranch house. The tension grew thick as the storm outside. Two strangers under one roof, trying to stay polite and failing more often than not. Ellie was used to city life, to books and music and conversation. Clay had none of those things. She found his silence unsettling, his routines dull and rigid. He found her talkative, nosy, and too curious for her own good. More than once, she'd commented on the state of the house, the worn curtains, the cluttered pantry, the missing warmth, as if she was cataloging all the ways it needed fixing. He didn't care for it. One morning, she tried to help with breakfast. Burned the bacon, dropped the skillet, and nearly fed Clay spoiled milk. He didn't yell, but the look he gave her could have frozen the firewood. "Well, excuse me," she snapped. "Next time I'll let you enjoy your solitary struggle in silence." "Fine by me," he replied, and yet, for all their bickering, something was shifting beneath the surface. They started to find rhythms, small, reluctant compromises. Clay taught her how to start a fire the right way. Ellie taught him how to brew tea without turning it into brown sludge. She mended one of his shirts, and he didn't say thank you, but he didn't throw it out either. She asked questions about the ranch, and he surprised himself by answering some of them. She was smart. He had to give her that. And tough. Not many women could handle isolation like this, let alone with grace. One afternoon, while chopping wood behind the barn, Clay saw her trudging through the snow toward him, skirts lifted, boots soaked. "You're going to freeze," he called. "I'm going to help," she said. He gave her a look. "You ever used an axe before?" "Not yet." He chuckled. Just a short, rough sound, but it made her smile. She wasn't helpless, and he wasn't heartless. That truth was becoming harder to ignore. That night, the wind howled so loud the windows rattled. Ellie couldn't sleep. She crept out of the guest room, found Clay sitting by the fire, book open in his lap, though he wasn't reading it. He looked up but didn't speak. She sat across from him, wrapped in a blanket. "I had a fiancé once," she said, unprompted. "He died before we were married. Consumption." Clay didn't answer right away. "Then, I had a wife." She left. They sat like that, two quiet shadows in a flickering room, not touching, not even looking at each other, but for the first time, truly seeing Dot in the days that followed, their routine softened. Clay no longer winced when she laughed. Ellie no longer flinched at his silence. They shared meals without awkwardness. She began helping with chores, hauling wood, feeding the animals, even learning to ride one of the gentler horses. There was still friction, of course. Still sharp words and long silences. But there was something else, too, a slow, reluctant respect growing between them. Like two people who'd long given up on connection, now finding it in the last place they'd expected, and though neither said it aloud, both were beginning to understand something quietly undeniable. This storm had brought more than just snow. It had brought a pause in the rhythm of two lonely lives. And in that pause, something new was starting to grow. The days blurred together in a rhythm neither of them had expected. Snow kept them locked in, but the ranch didn't stop needing care. Clay and Ellie fell into an uneasy truce that grew warmer by the day. Chores became shared, meals became conversations, and the silence that once filled the house began to feel less like emptiness and more like peace. Still, there were walls, thick ones, and Clay especially had built his to last. But Ellie, without trying, had a way of getting past his defenses. She asked questions. Not the nosy kind, but thoughtful ones. About the land, the animals, his routines, questions that showed she wasn't just surviving her stay. She was paying attention. And when Clay grumbled his replies, she never laughed or looked bored. She listened. Like what he said mattered. That, more than anything, unsettled him. One evening after supper, they lingered at the table, the fire crackling in the hearth. Ellie poured them both tea. She'd finally figured out how Clay liked it. Strong and unsweetened, and they sat in the quiet. Watching the snow fall through the window, I used to think silence was the same as loneliness, Ellie said softly, hands cupped around her mug. But now I'm not so sure. Clay didn't answer right away. He was watching her, the way her face softened in the firelight, the way she seemed to be thinking out loud more than making conversation. You learn to live with both, he said finally. Silence, loneliness. You get good at not needing much. Do you ever wish you needed more? The question landed like a nail on bare wood. Clay leaned back in his chair. His eyes flicked to the window. Needing something don't mean you'll get it. That's a lesson I learned the hard way. Ellie was quiet for a beat, then nodded. Me too. She told him then, not all at once, but in slow, careful pieces about her life back east, her work as a teacher, the cramped boarding house, the whispered judgments from other women when she passed 30 unmarried, the man she'd once been engaged to, a good man, a kind one, but sickly. He'd wasted away in a matter of months. After that, life felt like a hallway with all the doors closed. She didn't want pity, she said, just something different. Something real. That's why I answered the ad, she said. I wanted something that didn't come with lace gloves and piano lessons. Something raw, even if it meant failure. Clay had no idea what to say to that. It stunned him, not just her honesty, but the way it mirrored the ache he'd buried so deep he'd forgotten it was still there. That night, he couldn't sleep. He stood by the window in the dark, watching snow fall under a silver moon. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone in his own house. And that terrified him. The next morning, he was cold again, not cruel, just distant. Back to short replies, back to burying himself in chores. Ellie noticed, of course. She didn't push, but 2 days later, she did something Clay didn't expect. She rode out with him. He told her the storm had finally let up, enough to check on the far fence line. And without asking permission, she'd saddled one of the gentler horses and fallen in beside him. Wrapped in her oversized coat, cheeks pink with wind, she looked utterly out of place and completely determined. You don't belong out here, he said, not unkindly. No, she said, smiling. But I'm still here. At the fence line, the barbed wire had been torn down by the storm. Together they worked to fix it, Ellie fumbling at first, Clay watching with quiet amusement. She didn't complain. She got the job done, muddy and windblown, and didn't ask for praise. That night, Clay found her in the barn brushing the horse she'd ridden. She looked up at him, straw in her hair, a smudge of dirt on her cheek. You were right, she said. I don't belong out here. Not really. Clay didn't answer, but I think I'd like to. He didn't know what to say. Not yet. But the wall inside him, the one that had stood for 15 years, had a crack in it now. A small one. Barely there, but it was enough for light to start getting through. The snow began to melt slowly, almost reluctantly, as though the winter didn't want to loosen its grip on the ranch. But spring was coming. Clay could feel it in his bones. The mornings were still bitter, but the sun lingered longer each day, and the icicles hanging from the porch roof had started to drip. The road to town was still rough, but no longer impassable. By week's end, Ellie would be able to leave. The unspoken truth sat between them like a third person at every meal. She had somewhere else to be, Ellie didn't bring it up, and Clay didn't ask. But the air had shifted. Every moment they shared had weight now. Every glance held a question that neither of them seemed brave enough to answer. He found her more often, outside now, tending to the horses, walking the perimeter, even sitting out on the porch with a book in hand and her coat pulled tight. She wasn't just passing time anymore. She was becoming part of the place. One morning, Clay stepped out to find her trying to repair a broken hinge on the chicken coop. She had a tool in her hand and a look of fierce concentration on her face. "You planning to replace me?" he asked, arms crossed. She grinned. "You're too grumpy to replace." He walked over, took the hinge from her, and finished the job in a few practiced motions. She stood beside him, watching. "Town coach will be by in a couple days," he said, not looking at her. "I know." "You still planning to go?" Ellie was quiet for a long moment. "I was supposed to marry someone else. A preacher in a town I've never seen. He wrote letters kind once, but I don't know him. I thought I'd feel safe or useful or needed." Clay kept his eyes on the coop, tightening the final screw. "You still could." She nodded, but it was distracted. "Funny thing is, I don't think I want to be needed. I think I want to be wanted." That made him freeze, just for a second. That night, Clay couldn't sleep again. He sat by the fireplace, thinking about everything he hadn't said, about all the things he'd locked away. It had been so long since he let himself want anything real. And now, here she was, this woman who came into his life by mistake, who laughed in his kitchen and worked beside him in the cold, who listened when he spoke and didn't run when he grew quiet. The next day, he made a decision. He fixed up the wagon, hitched the horses, and told her they were going to town. For supplies, he said. But the truth sat beneath it. She didn't question him that it was a quiet ride, but not tense. Familiar now, comfortable. They reached the small town by late afternoon. Slush puddling in the streets, smoke curling from chimneys. It felt like the world was waking up. While Clay picked up feed and nails, Ellie wandered through the general store. She ran her fingers across bolts of fabric, smelled soap wrapped in brown paper, and read the labels on tins of tea. She looked not happy, exactly, but torn dot, and then a man stepped through the door. Tall, thin, with spectacles and a preacher's collar. He spotted her instantly. "Miss Prescott," he said, with a warm smile. "We've been expecting you." "I'm Reverend Collins." Clay stiffened behind the counter, turning slowly. Ellie, caught off guard, smiled politely, but her eyes betrayed something, hesitation. She nodded to the Reverend, exchanged pleasantries. He asked if she was ready to come with him. "Your room is ready. We'd be glad to have you." There was a silence. Then Ellie said, "Would you excuse me a moment?" She walked to Clay, who was still pretending to examine a barrel of nails. "I don't belong there," she said quietly. He turned. His heart was thudding so loud he thought it might be visible. "I didn't order a bride," he said. "But if I had—" She reached for his hand, rough, calloused, uncertain. "You don't have to say anything, Clay." But he did. "I don't want you to go." That was all. No grand speeches. Just truth. And for Ellie, it was enough. Eleanor Prescott did not leave with Reverend Collins. He waited, of course, a gentleman to the last. He stood on the wooden porch of the general store with his hands folded and his collar straight. Watching her speak with Clay, he'd assumed, perhaps reasonably, that a woman who answered a mail-order bride advertisement would be eager to settle into the life prepared for her. A clean room above the church, a position in the choir, a respectable husband, structured Sundays. But Ellie had spent her life being told what was respectable. And now, after all she'd seen, the silence of wide Montana skies, the roughness of a rancher's hands, the aching quiet of real companionship, that life felt paper thin. She turned back to the Reverend with a polite smile. "I'm not going with you," she said. Clearly and without apology, he blinked. "I see. May I ask why?" "You may," she replied, stepping closer. "Because that version of my life was never really mine. It was something I said yes to because I didn't know there was anything else. I know now." And with that, she stepped off the porch. Back to the man waiting by the wagon, the one who hadn't promised her anything but had shown her everything. They rode back in silence, the sun dipping behind the hills, casting long golden shadows over the melting snow. Ellie sat close beside Clay, wrapped in a wool blanket that smelled faintly of cedar and horse's dot. It wasn't a moment for words. They didn't need any when they reached the ranch. Rufus barked and bounded out to greet them, tail wagging like it hadn't in years. Clay helped Ellie down from the wagon, slower than he needed to, hand lingering in hers just a little longer than necessary. She didn't let go. The next few days passed like a dream. With the snow retreating and the land waking up beneath it, the ranch came alive in a way it hadn't in years, and so did Clay. There was no formal proposal, no grand moment with bended knee or silver rings. Just one quiet evening by the fire where Clay said, "I could fix up the back room proper. Make it yours or ours, if you'd rather." And Ellie, with a half smile and tired eyes, said, "I think it already is." They settled into something real. Not perfect, real. Clay was still quiet, still awkward with words, still more at home with fence wire than feelings. But he made space for her, built shelves where she could stack her books, repaired the piano May had left behind, even though it hadn't played a tune in years. He even let her paint the kitchen window trim a soft blue, muttering about the color while secretly admiring the way it made the morning light feel warmer. Ellie, for her part, didn't try to change him. She just stayed. She read aloud to him on cold nights, cooked stews with spices he couldn't pronounce, laughed at his dry jokes and rolled her eyes when he pretended not to care. And little by little, Clay found himself laughing more, sleeping easier, and looking forward to mornings in a way he hadn't since he was a young man. The neighbors started to talk again, only this time with smiles. The ghost of Morgan Ranch was alive again, and people said it was because of her. Some thought it was strange how she'd ended up there. A mistake, they called it. But Clay didn't believe in mistakes anymore. He believed in second chances. He believed in fences that could be mended, hearts that could be patched up, and quiet women from Boston who could stand shoulder to shoulder with him in a blizzard and not flinch. One evening, months later, as spring turned the grass green again, Ellie stood on the porch, gazing out at the horizon. Clay joined her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You ever wonder," he asked softly, "what would have happened if that coach dropped you off at the right place?" Ellie leaned back against him. "Sometimes. And I think I'd still be wondering if I was in the wrong place." He kissed her temple, gentle, grateful. "You're not." "No," she said. "I'm not." The sun dipped below the mountains. The wind stirred the grass. And the two of them stood there, not as a rancher and a stranger, but as something new. Not alone anymore. Not lost. Just home.